The Tale of Fugitus Castle. In the northeast sea of Aura is the island of Fugitus. The island is mostly covered in thick forests with stout trees and dark green leaves. There are also stony mountains. At the dark center of the densest point of the forest, and built against the face of Mount Copernine, is the castle of Fugitus Forest. Instead of a moat, a ravine with magma at the bottom girds the front of the castle. A black iron drawbridge rises and falls from two gates, each of which empties into a chamber or court. Paths have been cut through the forest over the centuries, and traffic on horse goes across all reaches of the island. One day, the king of the island was killed by an assassin from the far end of Fugitus. There a group of towns exist beyond the rule of the castle. Some of them wanted to take over the castle for their own people. The soldiers of Fugitus Castle fought off an initial attack. The king had been killed by a thrown knife. Then, a group of friends from one of the outer towns banded together to help defend the castle from an impending onslaught. They feared reprisals would threaten starvation for their own people. They rode ahead through the forest, fending off moss and fungus malevolence. Those behind the gates of the castle did not believe the five friends when they offered their assistance. Only one was admitted, Herman. The other four waded into the night. The light from the magma was soft below them. Herman was unable to convince the Princess Diera, now having taken the throne for her late father. She seemed especially annoyed at Herman for his compliments and had him held for the time being. Meanwhile, the other four heard the oncoming of the shore town rabble and decided it was high time to get into the castle, lest the army of barbarians realize they had gone ahead to warn the castle. They climbed across the ravine on rope and scaled the wall to a window where Herman was kept. The army used hooks and rope to attempt to scale the castle. Many did, some fell into the hot lava. Ropes were secured to the drawbridge, and hundreds tried to use trees as leverage for their strength in order to pull open the gate. Some shot flaming arrows. Herman and the other friends burst out of the room and aided in throwing off the invaders, who crawled in like pirates boarding a ship. Herman fended off attackers going for Princess Diera. The drawbridge was captured, one of them, and opened. Just then, a massive glowworm rose from the magma pit and blasted the attackers with flames. After they were driven off, the worm descended back down. The five friends were made marshals, and Herman got the hand of Princess Diana, making him prince and later king of Fugitus Castle. Chapter 2. The Hemmings House. Any road one walks or rides in Estatia will seem overly adorned in the riches of that season. Whether summer's veil of balm and golden green leaves exploding from trees, or the rushing amber flakes of autumn, even winter, frequently stolid and heaped in white, is dressed with deep green holly and evergreens, so that the slowest of seasons would have its own mirth. It was a wealth that perhaps blinded many to the threadbare countries around the summer country. Visiting them made the lushness of Estatia heightened on returning. George marched along the Wood Chief Road, next to the long fence that hemmed the fields of central Penzerd. Occasionally, George's boots would hit a pile of ochre dust, and the smoke would smolder about his legs, and at a crossroads he would stop and let that phantom shape glide in a breeze down the hill. He was at the bottom of a great basin between three hills, around which a different road coursed. George went on until he soon came to a great plunge in the landscape, the tops of some trees level with his face. Down at the bottom of the valley was the full and winding body of the Urso River. The silty life and churning roar met George's nose and ears. The Scott Bridge was to his right, comprised of arches and river stones, 100 feet above the water. George crossed it, the stones smoothed by 10 score years of travel on it. Above the hill, across the river, hidden in part by trees that had not yet lost the last of their jealously worn summer garb, was the Hemmings farm. There on the bridge was where most people glimpsed it. George frequently saw its palatial facade from the lower road on the other side. The river ran around the promontory and widened into the mightiest of all Estatian rivers. Just over the bridge was an obscure road in the midst of 2 rows of pear trees. That path turned on and into the warm shadows. George followed it. Under his right arm was the Hierodex. Parts of its leather cover touched his hand, and it felt warm like something alive. The path was then a tunnel of smooth, twining branches with the leaves darkened at the top. George heard voices, laughter, and water splash. Around the next bend he saw the forest side face of the Hemmings manor, a house with 2 faces. Its 3 stories were bathed in a soft greenness from the leaves that encircled the round drive up to the front door. The massive expanse of a chestnut rose from behind the house, and what strong light did breach the forest were like flecks of gold in unexpected and hidden places. The laughter continued, and George moved towards the pool house where a half-dozen Hemmings and friends played in waters of cerulean crystal. On the side porch, westwardly facing the pool, sat Henry Hemmings III and some of his children. He was a tall and powerful-looking man, with an indomitable face and winning eyes. He ate a bowl of wild rice, a stew it seemed, with chicken and carrots. His meal, and that of the others, sat on a round blue-silver table on the porch. Their glasses, large and thick, were adorned and carved like lidless tankards. These vessels carried cider, no doubt pressed from the crop of their own orchard in Monk Valley. Harrison, or Harry Hemmings, sat next to his father, and was clearly the eldest, while the youngest, Dorothy, sat on the other side of her pa, wearing a dark flower-printed dress with white lace. Her glass was filled with iced tea. George was further scanning the property for others and was just peering down the hill to the river when a softly booming, leonine voice said, "Welcome, George." His hand fanned out. "Come and sit. I'll have Damon bring you some soup if you'd like." "Thank you, sir. I'm not exactly hungry right now. I was just on my way to town, and I'd stopped at Bear's house earlier. He gave me this." George presented the book, and at last crumpled the tattered wrapping. Hemmings became milder, though still pleased. "That is a great volume, and Bear gave it to you? He must know you enjoy those sorts of books." George sat at the table and displayed it for all. Dorothy peeked especially close. The first page had English, but also a written language unknown to George. "That is the Vokar," said Hemmings. "A few people can read it, but I can't." The young Dorothy turned a page as gently as she could, and it was plain that she marveled at the shape of letters and words and the frequent precise woodcuts of foxes and owls and marbles. She was the last child delivered by the mother of the Hemmings clan, who vanished as in an enigmatic dream. A glass of cider was set down for George by Damon. They talked of George's home and his mother, the jobs they had all been doing on the farm. Yet, incessantly, George found his eyes drift back to the pool, with a great hope that Starlock would soon rise from the water, if she were there. Lyle, 3rd eldest, came over from the opposite side of the house. Hemmings rose at once, and the two began talking in calm but serious tones of one of the horses. They had recently purchased an umbered stallion named Macabre. He was from Dalinia and made his name running messages during the Prescardian War. No one knew of a faster horse, and so its owner, the late Frank Burns, the monster feller, sold him to Henry shortly before his death. Many other horses had already passed through the Hemmings stables, steeds that usually went to win races or battles. George wondered if anything was wrong with Macabre, or whether he was settling into his new dwelling easily. A gleam to his right caught George's attention. Stepping out from underneath the awning of the pool house and into the sunlight of noon was Starlock. The rays blazed over her hair and it became infused with several shades of faintest yellow, blue, and pink, all phasing back into the platinum cascade around her head. She watched the others swim. Her dress was very dark, with short sleeves. George couldn't tell if it was black or deepest indigo. While trying to return to the table and those at it, George almost overturned his cider. Several drops landed near the Hierodex. The Hemmings siblings playfully gasped, and one swooped in with a washcloth. Starlock was on her way to the porch. She stopped to josh with Harry and Dorothy before her eyes were seized by the book. George watched her well-rounded arms ease the cover open, and with one finger turn the first page. "Where in the world did this come from?" she said, astonished. "George brought it," said Dorothy. Starlock looked at him, surprised green eyes under dark brows. "Hello," they said to one another. "I thought," George went on, "that you would enjoy seeing this. A gift from Bear Gun to me. Though I've only scratched the surface." At that, Starlock smoothed her hand over the cover, as George had. She paused and thought for a moment. "I would really like to read this someday," she said it to George in a tone that seemed almost confidential. "Of course," blurted George. "Any time you'd like, I can bring it over and you can read it to your heart's content." He looked at her in the eyes, and the words seemed to mean something to her. Lyle came from around the house and through the porch screen said, "Star, Macabra's calmed down. He was acting up. Might have gotten spooked a little." Starlock immediately left for the stable. The book lay open still. George shut it. "She's the one that's been most excited by that horse since we got him," said Harry. "Even whispered to it a few times." After his cider, George declared he was leaving. Dorothy gave him a hug and opened the door for two black Alsatians to launch and careen around George like two midnight comets. The shadows were heavy and turquoise. The white-painted carved wood swings hung still under the chestnut. He made one last attempt to see her as he passed back towards the pear groves, yet the open stable door was all.